Hey guys, today we're diving into another truly horrifying case. If you want to support my channel, make sure to subscribe and stay active. It really helps me out. I'd be super grateful for that. Let's get started. A feeling of deep regret over making the wrong choice can hit at any moment, often tied to missed chances or missteps in personal life. Choosing a partner is a serious and responsible decision, but how can you tell if it's the right person? And what do you do if your partner falls short of your hopes? In most cases, it's better to end such a relationship before it goes too far. Even the arrival of a son or daughter often doesn't save or strengthen such a mistaken union. It only breaks it completely. Joanna Simpson's story isn't exactly unique, but it's no less chilling because of that. She met the wrong man and regretted her choice almost right after the wedding, but decided to keep the family together because she learned she was expecting. Deep down, she hoped that her partner would change once they welcomed a baby, but even the birth of their 2 children didn't fix things. When she finally realized she was living with a monster and decided to leave, it was already too late. Joanna Grace Simpson was born on August 20th, 1964, in the city of York, in the ceremonial county of North Yorkshire. She was the only child of Diane Parks and Christopher Simpson. Her parents were very well off, with her father owning a large construction company. So from the start, Joanna never knew what it was like to be denied anything. Even though little Joanna got the best of everything, she never became the typical spoiled daughter. Her parents raised her with discipline and a sense of responsibility. She attended a prestigious private girls' school in York, took art classes, and studied classical dance and foreign languages. In the mid-1970s, Christopher decided to sell his multi-million-dollar business, and the family moved to the Isle of Man. There, they bought a lavish estate in the small, picturesque town of Laxey, which had a population of only about 2,000 people. Joanna continued her studies at Buchan School, part of King William's College, and later enrolled at Oxford High School. From an early age, Joanna was known for her discipline, seriousness, and drive. Whatever she took on, she aimed to do it perfectly. She had a ton of talents and enormous potential. Those who knew her described Joanna as a bright personality, active, very responsible, and always honest. She was someone people could count on, never letting anyone down. After graduating high school, Joanna enrolled at the University of Bath, where she studied business modeling and entrepreneurship. Back then, she dreamed of moving to London and opening her own construction firm, just like her father once had. However, she later decided to pivot to the hotel business. Alongside all her talents and ambitions, Joanna had a kind heart and a calm nature. She had plenty of friends because she knew how to listen, offer help, and never left anyone in a tough spot. Her parents were proud of her. Teachers held her up as an example, and everyone was sure she had a bright future ahead. It's also worth mentioning that Joanna was stunningly attractive, so she was never short on admirers. But she was a sensible and focused person, and she knew how to set her priorities straight. She chose to focus on her studies and career, leaving her personal life on the back burner for the time being. After graduating from college, Joanna moved to the south of England, to the historic ceremonial county of Berkshire. She settled in the Thames Valley, in what's known as the Green Area. She opened her own hotel on the outskirts of the famous Windsor Great Park, a popular tourist spot, and the business quickly became a steady source of income. In 1994, when Joanna was 30, her longtime boyfriend, someone she'd been dating for years, proposed to her. He too came from a well-off family, had a prestigious education, and ran his own business. On paper, it seemed like a perfect match, almost too good to be true. Both families gave their blessing, and the couple threw a lavish wedding with around 200 guests in attendance. Among them were not only close friends and family, but also business partners and members of the media. Photos of the celebration were even published in local newspapers. The newlyweds bought a massive historic mansion in Ascot. While it needed more than just a few repairs, it was basically begging for a total renovation. Neither of them was fazed. They had the money and were excited to turn the centuries-old property into a cozy family home. They managed to do it all in just a year. Plus, they converted part of the house into a guest wing so friends and relatives could stay over. Joanna poured her heart into her hotel business and fixing up the house, and at that point, she wasn't even thinking about having a son or daughter. But her husband was set on becoming a dad. He constantly talked about how he dreamed of having a boy. Joanna asked him to give it some time, but those conversations usually turned into heated arguments. They started to drift apart, and in just 2 years, their marriage was already on shaky ground. At the end of 1997, they decided to split up, realizing their relationship had simply run its course. The breakup was surprisingly calm, with no drama or finger-pointing. The house they'd poured so much effort into ended up going to Joanna. She'd invested more money and work into it, and her husband, probably feeling guilty since he was the one who pushed for the divorce, gave up any claim on the property. Even though Joanna did her best to keep up appearances, the end of her marriage was a tough blow. She tried to keep busy with work and spend time with friends, but she was slipping into a deep depression. That's when her best friend, who was working as a flight attendant on international routes, suggested a trip to South Africa, since she was heading there for work. Nobody could have imagined that this sudden journey would end up changing Joanna's life forever, and not in the way anyone expected. Joanna just wanted a break, something to take her mind off everything and maybe help her shake the blues. She definitely wasn't looking to start something new, but her friend introduced her to Robert Brown, a British Airways pilot, and he made an instant impression on her. Robert was smart, confident, and charismatic, and Joanna was quickly drawn to him. Robert was the same age as Joanna, born in 1964 in Edinburgh. He'd been active in sports for years, particularly track and field, and had even won several cross-country titles in the UK, which he was really proud of. He was also an avid reader and could carry a conversation about almost anything. He was genuinely interesting to talk to. When Joanna and Robert came back from that trip, they were already a couple. Robert moved into Joanna's fancy mansion, and within just a couple of weeks, she introduced him to her parents as her new partner. Diane and Christopher were taken aback by how quickly it had all happened. After all, their daughter had only just gotten divorced, and they didn't think she was ready to jump back in. In the eyes of the Simpsons, Robert wasn't a great match for their daughter. He'd grown up in a modest family. His dad worked in a shipyard and his mom was a bank clerk. He'd gotten a solid education at an aviation college and had made his childhood dream come true by becoming a pilot. But he came from a very different world, and while he was living in Joanna's house, he wasn't earning anywhere close to what she was making with her hotel business. On top of that, Joanna's parents saw something unsettling in Robert. He was intelligent and good-looking, but there was also a harshness and arrogance about him that they didn't like. Joanna, swept up in her feelings, didn't want to hear it. By the end of summer in 1998, the couple was already talking about getting married. Trying to talk Joanna out of it was pointless. By Christmas that same year, Robert proposed, and she happily said yes. They started planning the wedding, but this time, Joanna didn't want a big, fancy celebration. She wanted a simple ceremony with just about 15 of their closest people. No cameras, no fuss. Robert didn't mind. Joanna's parents were stunned when they heard the news that the wedding was planned for February 1999. The couple had known each other only a few months, and Diane and Christopher had met Robert only a couple of times, and he hadn't exactly won them over. It took a lot of convincing, but they finally got Joanna to agree to a prenuptial agreement to protect her assets and accounts in case things didn't work out. After their small wedding surrounded by just their closest friends and family, the newlyweds decided to honeymoon in South Africa, the beautiful country where they'd first met. They checked into one of the top hotels, and Joanna was looking forward to what she hoped would be an unforgettable trip. It did turn out to be unforgettable, but not in the way she expected. From the very first days, Robert revealed a completely different side of himself. He was rude to the hotel staff, sometimes even insulting them outright, and he never missed a chance to show off his arrogance. Joanna was constantly embarrassed, apologizing to the staff, and doing her best to smooth over the situation. Just a week into their honeymoon, Joanna was already questioning if she'd made a huge mistake. She realized she barely knew the man she'd married. One night, when Robert was out of the room, she called her mom in tears and told her everything. Diane's advice was clear. When she got back home, she needed to file for divorce immediately. But despite everything, Joanna decided to hold off on ending the marriage and try to make it work. She wanted to give Robert another chance, hoping he might change, and soon she found out she was expecting, which made things even more complicated. When Robert heard about the pregnancy, he realized that Joanna wasn't going anywhere now. He became even more arrogant and dismissive. At Joanna's parents' house, he'd become completely unwelcome because of his attitude and disrespect. They begged Joanna to leave him, but she didn't want their son to grow up without his father, so she stayed, even though there was no happiness in that home. In November 1999, Joanna gave birth to their son, Alex. Soon after, she found out she was pregnant again. Robert didn't show much excitement. He was practically indifferent. In the spring of 2001, their daughter, Katarina, was born. But the arrival of their two children didn't improve things at all. In fact, the situation at home just kept getting worse. At that point, Brown was working as an international airline pilot, flying Boeing 747s for British Airways, with regular long-haul routes that took him through Hong Kong, Los Angeles, and Sydney. But even when he came back from these far-flung flights, he showed no interest in spending time with Joanna or their son and daughter. He didn't have many friends either, and those who did know him described Robert as closed-off, rude, and arrogant. The family lived in Ascot, in a mansion on Millionaires Row, near the vast Windsor Great Park. It was a convenient spot for Robert because it kept him close to London's Heathrow Airport, where he worked. He was comfortable with this arrangement, even though it was obvious that family life wasn't what he was cut out for. Robert stayed just as cold and distant as he'd always been. While he was harsh with his words, he never went beyond insults. He never laid a hand on Joanna or the children. That was probably the only reason their marriage lasted as long as it did. But everyone close to them could see how much Robert was wearing Joanna down emotionally. Joanna herself understood that her marriage was doomed and that divorce was just a matter of time. In January 2007, after 8 years of being married to Brown, she finally reached out to a family attorney to talk about ending the relationship. What pushed her to this step was a huge argument where Robert accused her of being unfaithful, completely without reason. A month later, Joanna knew for sure that she needed to end it for good. Robert had shared some dark thoughts with her. He admitted that he'd fantasized many times about taking her life and their children's lives and then ending his own by crashing a plane full of passengers. Joanna was terrified. She knew he wasn't joking and wasn't just trying to scare her. A few weeks later, Joanna was picking up Alex and Katarina from school. She said hello and chatted briefly with a man whose kids were in the same classes as hers. Robert saw this and flipped out when they got home, accusing her of cheating. This time, he didn't stop at yelling or threatening. He grabbed her by the throat with one hand, held a knife to her chest with the other, and told her he'd take her life. It took every ounce of strength Joanna had to calm him down and convince him to put down the knife. After that, she made it clear that she was done. She said their marriage was over. In response, Brown told her she could file for divorce if she wanted, but he'd never let her take their son and daughter. He also said that if she told the police about what had happened with the knife, he'd make good on his threats. The next day, Joanna and the kids fled to the Isle of Man, hiding in her parents' house. She filed for divorce, but it dragged on because Robert countersued, claiming he wanted to keep the family together and that Joanna was just trying to erase him from Alex and Katarina's lives. On top of that, Robert refused to move out of the house until the divorce was final, saying he wanted to spend as much time as possible with their son and daughter. For almost 6 months, even though they were technically already separated, they continued to live under the same roof. In the end, though, Joanna took it to court and forced Robert to leave the mansion that was fully hers. Simpson and Brown had separated, but their divorce wasn't final yet. They still had to figure out custody and visitation schedules for Alex and Katarina. After moving out, it seemed like Robert had finally accepted that their marriage was over. He was acting suspiciously calm, no more fights or threats, and he stuck to the schedule for seeing his son and daughter. Pretty soon, Robert got involved with one of his co-workers, a flight attendant at British Airways, and moved in with her. Things moved fast, and within a few months, she was pregnant. When Joanna found out, she felt relieved. She thought that now, with a new family on the way, Robert would leave her alone. But it turned out that while he was busy with his new life, Robert was also working on ways to challenge the prenuptial agreement he had signed with Joanna. He'd been reading up on the famous case of Katrin Radmacher, a wealthy German heiress. Her ex-husband, Nicholas Granatino, had sued her over the prenup, claiming that he hadn't known the full extent of her wealth when he signed it. The Radmacher-Granatino case had been all over the news, but in the end, Granatino lost. He couldn't lay claim to any of her assets. That decision set a precedent that could also affect Joanna's case, and it drove Robert to desperation. Still, he refused to give up his fight to get the house, money, and anything else that had originally belonged to Joanna. Joanna and Robert had to see each other from time to time because they were still co-parenting Alex and Katarina. But Joanna was afraid of him, so whenever he came to pick up or drop off the kids, she tried to avoid being alone with him. This went on until October 31st, 2010, when Robert was supposed to bring the kids back after they'd spent fall break with his parents. Unfortunately, Joanna was home by herself that day. On November 1st, 2 separate calls came into the police station that raised alarms. One was from Joanna's worried parents, who hadn't been able to get in touch with her. The other was from Robert himself. He came in and told officers that something had happened at his ex-wife's house. He didn't give much detail, but since Joanna's parents had already voiced their fears that Robert might be involved in her disappearance, the police decided to hold him for questioning. A team of investigators went straight to Joanna's home to check it out. Her car was parked in the driveway, but there was no sign of her anywhere. The back door was unlocked, and as soon as the officers stepped inside, they could tell this was a crime scene. They saw a trail of blood droplets leading to a door. In the living room, the blood trail ended at what looked like signs of a struggle. Several large stains of blood on the floor. But there was no sign of Joanna or the kids, and nobody knew where they might be. When Diane and Christopher heard what the police had found at their daughter's home, they immediately suspected Robert. They feared he'd done something to Joanna, and possibly even taken the kids. At that point, nobody knew where 9-year-old Alex or 8-year-old Katarina were. Since Robert had been the one to walk into the station and tell police something had happened at Joanna's house, it looked like he was ready to confess. But when they started asking questions, he suddenly shut down and said he wouldn't talk. Before long, though, the police learned that he'd dropped off Alex and Katarina at his parents' house before coming to the station. Alex and Katarina might have been key witnesses. They could have had crucial information, so the police approached them gently and tried to find out what they knew. The kids said that on the day their dad brought them back home, they'd overheard their parents arguing from another room. At first, Mom and Dad were shouting. Then there was a scream and the sound of heavy thuds. Terrified, Alex peeked into the living room and saw his father carrying his mom in his arms with blood streaming down her head. Robert told his son that she had fallen and hit her head and that they were going to take her to the hospital. He carried her out the back door, where he'd parked his car, and put her in the trunk. Then he told Alex and Katarina to get into the back seat. On the drive, Robert said he was going to drop them off at their grandparents' house and take their mom to the hospital himself. That was the last thing the kids knew about what happened to their mom. Their father didn't come back until late that night, and when they asked questions, he just said everything was fine. When the police told Robert what his son and daughter had shared, he asked for a lawyer, and then, unexpectedly, he started talking. He admitted that he and Joanna had gotten into a fight that day and he'd lost his temper. He said he'd hit her several times with the first thing he could grab. When he realized what he'd done, he claimed he wanted to take her to the hospital and dropped the kids off at his parents' house so they wouldn't see any more of what was going on. He said that when he stopped to check on Joanna, he was horrified to see that she was already gone. In a panic, he said he decided to get rid of her body, but claimed he wasn't thinking clearly at the time. But his story didn't make much sense. Why did he put an injured Joanna in the trunk instead of the back seat? If he thought she needed urgent medical help, why didn't he rush straight to the hospital? Robert agreed to show the police where he'd buried Joanna. He took them to a thick patch of forest about half a mile from the road. At first glance, the ground looked untouched, but when detectives started digging, they found a plastic container about 6 feet down. Inside was the body of 46-year-old Joanna. The medical examiner found 14 blunt force injuries to her head. In the grave, they also found the weapon, a heavy hammer. The burial site was meticulously concealed and covered with leaves. If Robert hadn't pointed it out, it was likely that Joanna's body would never have been found. Interestingly, it had just gotten cold, and the ground was frozen solid. It was hard to believe that Robert could have dug such a deep hole by himself and covered it up so well. Detectives suspected he'd planned everything ahead of time. That suspicion was quickly confirmed by Alex and Katarina. They told investigators that while they'd been on break with their dad, he'd taken them to that same forest, where they'd played for hours. They even recognized the area right away and showed detectives their secret cave, where they'd hidden a stash of toys. As for Robert, he kept insisting he hadn't planned any of it, claiming he'd been in a state of shock. But the longer the interviews went on, the clearer it became that he was lying. He had a deep-seated resentment toward Joanna and her family. He called her a spoiled princess and said she'd grown up with everything handed to her, never knowing what it was like to work hard for anything. The son and daughter of the woman who lost her life also told detectives that their dad had asked them, just in case, for the alarm code to the mansion. More than once, he'd taken them there when no one was home and spent a long time searching for something, always telling them not to mention it to their mom. It turned out that Robert hadn't given up on getting a piece of the estate after the divorce. He was convinced he'd been tricked into signing the prenup and was sure that Joanna's assets were worth tens of millions of pounds. He was looking for documents that would prove his suspicions so he could file another lawsuit to try to invalidate the prenup. All the evidence and witness statements pointed to the fact that Brown had planned everything in advance. Adding to this, the final hearing for their divorce was scheduled for November 8th, and since Robert hadn't been able to challenge the prenup, it seemed clear that he decided to resolve the situation in a brutal way. In May 2011, a jury made a surprising decision, ruling that the death of the mother of two was not premeditated. Robert, who at first faced a life sentence without parole, was instead sentenced to 25 years in prison. He would be eligible for parole after just 13 years. But in 2013, the parole board determined that Brown still posed a threat to society and denied his release, keeping him behind bars. Thanks for watching, everyone. Your support means a lot to me, and you can help my channel grow by hitting that like button, dropping a comment, and sharing this video. Your engagement really makes a difference. See you soon.